I've been giving a lot of thought about the state of our union and our collective desire to have a more perfect union, a union of hearts, a union of minds, and so much more. And as I reflected on this and on the ways we have enjoyed progress and the ways we haven't, I also began to think about our human nature, about how we choose to show up in the world and the ripples we create across the spheres of our influence. As someone who loves data and science, I've learned a few things about our emerging research in data and science. I've learned that we, as humans, have a tendency to create in-groups and out-groups, people who are like us and not like us. And when we do that, something happens in the brain. There are centers in the brain associated with empathy and compassion. And when we see people like us, we naturally extend empathy and compassion. And when we see people who are not like us, it's a little bit harder. But guess what? It's not just in the extension of empathy where that part of the brain is activated, but there is also something else that happens when we see people who are not like us and we perceive things as unfair. In the brain, the parts associated with empathy not only come offline, but the part that comes online is associated with revenge seeking, believe it or not. We also know from the emerging research that trauma plays a role. Trauma is held in our bodies at the cellular level. It is both intragenerational and intergenerational, meaning that it impacts us at the level of the DNA and can move from generation to generation to generation. In fact, some people say that we are impacted by the 7 generations before us, and we impact the 7 generations after us. That is 14 generations. That's a lot of ripples. So those who say we should get over slavery, that it ended more than 150 years ago, or that the tentacles of our origins no longer exist in altered form in this present day, they not only fail to understand the far-reaching impact of historical acts, but also simple biology. I know that many in our legislative body and communities are tired of talking about race and the isms. I too am tired. But the work continues and calls on us to be active, conscious, eyes wide open participants in co-creating this new era of Reconstruction. An era where the ills of the past do not continue to insidiously weave themselves into our present, springing forth from its roots into our future. A new era where we no longer see African American women dying at higher rates after childbirth. A new era where we no longer see NFL coaches like Brian Flores participate on what many would call access to head coaching positions, but with no real opportunity. Particularly in an industry where 70% of the players are Black, but only a few coaches are. A new era where our Black men are not incarcerated at higher rates for the same or lower offenses as others in the criminal justice system. A new era where the U.S., which is home to only 5% of the world's population, no longer makes up 25% of the world's prison population. A new era where the full, uncomfortable, and glorious history of our nation is taught in all of our classrooms. Until the contributions of African Americans to the building and growth of our nation is commonly taught, we will continue to not see the beauty that is and always has been here. The beauty of people like Dr. Walter Johnson, who built a tennis dynasty in our very own Lynchburg, Virginia, that produced the first 2 African American Grand Slam champions, Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe. People like Lewis Latimer, who invented the carbon filament light bulb, which was the birth of the modern light bulb that we enjoy today, and people like Claudette Colvin, the courageous 15-year-old girl who refused to give up her seat before Rosa Parks did. A new era where, as Delegate Sullivan mentioned yesterday, where we remove the institutional barriers, systems, and structures that require so many of us to push through and be the first. But Mr. Speaker, until then, we need our firsts. Our children need them, our families need them, our nation needs them. Until then, there is an invitation for all of us to understand that we inherited what we have today, and to understand that until all of us are safe and free and healthy and flourishing, none of us truly are. On this day in this year's Black History Month, I invite each of us to help make these firsts, the inequities, part of our historical past, no longer our present or our future. I invite us to not all just have the courage, but the moral courage to create what we know to be the better way for each and every one of us, without regard to party, race, perspective, or place in our society. I invite us to make it so that one of our future firsts is that we no longer need to separate out special months to recognize our common humanity, our interdependent nature, and the contributions of all members of society. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, I believe that there is room for everyone at the table if we are courageous enough to make the space. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.